It's spring of the year 711, a few years after the Arab conquest of northern Africa. Umayyad governor of Afriqiya province sends a war party to cross the strait and plunder the southern lands of the internally weakened Visigothic kingdom. Disputed King Roderick gathers an army and marches south in order to push the invaders back to Africa. In the beginning of the 800th century, the Iberian Peninsula was inhabited by Visigoths, who established their kingdom some centuries earlier at the expense of the collapsing Western Roman Empire. The Visigothic kingdom was then a well-settled local power with quite a healthy administration run by a small number of Visigothic elite class, which in fact consisted of dozens of influential houses competing for power and responsible for electing the monarch among them. In 705, the kingdom was ruled by the young king Witiza, who sat on the throne since his early youth, co-ruling with his father at first. It was a somewhat peaceful time, by the standards of the Middle Ages at least. The king's most pressing concerns involved minor conflict with the Basques to the north and brief border quarrels with the Byzantine Empire and Frankish kingdom. A few years later, Visigothic rule on the Iberian Peninsula was critically threatened both internally and externally. Although little is known about Witiza's reign, he certainly had enemies. In 710, he was suddenly overthrown and then probably killed by a Gothic faction led by Roderick, Duke of Boeotia. Consequently, the Visigothic kingdom sank into turmoil. Roderick stepped up to the throne in Toledo, but was opposed by Aquila, another claimant, who took the northeastern part of the country and crowned himself there. A serious risk of civil war was on the horizon, but yet another external threat had reached the Visigothic southern border. The Umayyad Caliphate extended its influence over the North African coast, inhabited mostly by Berber tribes, which were converted to Islam over the years. The governor of the freshly established Afriqiya province, Musa bin Nusayr, was probably well informed regarding internal problems of the Visigoths, as both Berber and Arab raiding parties occasionally ravaged the coastal settlements of Hispania. He appointed his subordinate, Berber general Tariq ibn Ziyad, governor of recently conquered Tangier, to cross the strait with an army in order to challenge the divided Visigothic kingdom. In early 711, Tariq landed with his army 700 men strong in southern Boeotia and, unopposed, plundered a handful of Visigothic cities. Soon, Musa, being pleased by the initial gains of Tariq, sent another 5,000 soldiers to support the Berber general. Roderick was then busy in northern Hispania, quelling the rebellious Basques, but upon hearing the news, he moved back south and assembled the force able to fend off the Muslims. He obtained the support of a considerable number of his former opponents, who supposedly wanted to aid the king's effort to defend the kingdom. It was even probable that his main opponent, Aquila, also joined the allied forces. The gathering of the troops was done in midsummer, and Roderick marched south to deal with the Muslim invaders. When Tariq's scouts reported that a large Christian army was in southern Boeotia marching to meet him, he decided to take up a good position on higher ground, which also offered a decent view of the battlefield. Most of Tariq's army, though not as big as the Visigothic one, was decently equipped, moderately experienced, and loyal. A third of his troops were Berber mounted units, a mix of light and heavy cavalrymen. The rest of his battle line comprised of infantry troops of Berber and Moorish origin, with a few missile units among them. Probably the only Arabic complement on the battlefield was Tariq's guard, counting around 300 men. In contrast, the Visigothic army was twice as numerous as the Umayyad one, but the majority of Roderick's units were slaves and peasants, often wielding nothing more fancy than simple spears, axes, or clubs, and using no armor at all. They lacked training, discipline, and even their loyalty was dubious, as they were probably forced to join Roderick's side. but he also had more valuable units under his command, including a good number of well-armored Visigothic nobility with their servants, and some well-trained heavy cavalry detachments. Roderick launched some initial assaults to probe the Muslims, probably trying to lure them out of their favorable positions on the hill. But Tariq's units pushed back the Gothic cavalry and held the line firmly. Roderick realized that the Muslim army wouldn't take the bait and decided to use his greater numbers and attack frontally with full strength, hoping to overwhelm the invaders. The whole Visigothic army rushed forward, charging and taunting their enemy. But when the most loyal units in the center were about to hit Tariq's line, many of Roderick's allies on the wings stood behind and watched the king's retinue engage the first Berber units. When battle commenced in the center, Roderick probably realized that he was betrayed by many of his subordinates and vassals. It's not clear why almost the entire flank ceased their attacks and retreated, the most probable reason being that Roderick's coup effectively led to the partition of the kingdom, and a good part of the discontented nobility plotted against his rule. While most of them joined the force to fend off the Muslims, they had no intention to take part in the battle. Tariq quickly realized what was going on. Possibly he could have even made a deal with some of the Visigothic nobles, but that's uncertain. Berber cavalry rushed out and flanked the secluded Visigothic center. Roderick's men fought bravely, but being outflanked and outnumbered, they couldn't hold for long. Muslim cavalry finished the encirclement and the slaughter began. King Roderick probably died in battle, together with many of the Visigothic nobles. This crushing defeat had an almost immediate effect on Roderick's realm. Still divided and virtually defenseless as the ruling class was significantly thinned out after the battle, the Visigothic kingdom couldn't stop the Muslims from taking over the capital a few months later. The Umayyad Caliphate needed just a few more years to completely overrun the whole of Hispania. The unusually fast disintegration of the Visigothic kingdom also marked the beginning of Arabic domination on the Iberian Peninsula.